So the Supreme Court nomination, it's going to be a battle, no doubt.
The Dan Yorke State of Mind program is brought to you in part by Lookout Rhode Island and Takeo Comfort Solutions.
So the Supreme Court nomination of Brett Kavanaugh is going to be something that is going to be a battle and a half, and you know it really hasn't taken off as a major thing because we've had Russia and we've had wouldn't, and I didn't say no, and all that kind of thing. But somewhere along the line here, and maybe Republicans are so entrenched in protecting Donald Trump because of what's at stake with the Supreme Court. It certainly has been the motivation for a lot of what's happened, with the last nomination and the power and the balance of the Supreme Court. And past that, I don't really have the wherewithal to be able to break this thing down, but I got a power panel here tonight to do so from Roger Williams University. So let me just throw this headline up that reminds you and everybody else that this confirmation battle is already in progress. And here's the latest package we have to kind of lay the whole thing out.
I think his record speaks for itself.
Vice President Mike Pence escorted the 53-year-old Yale graduate and appeals court judge to meet with key Republican senators. Majority Leader Mitch McConnell says he expects the confirmation process to unfold over the next few weeks.
I think the president made an outstanding nomination.
But Senate Democrats on the Judiciary Committee vowed to fight Kavanaugh's nomination. Standing by the Supreme Court steps, they said Kavanaugh is an extreme choice to fill Justice Anthony Kennedy's seat.
We must defeat Judge Kavanaugh's nomination to the bench to save women's reproductive freedom, to save health care protections for millions.
Even if every Democrat votes no, it still wouldn't be enough to quash the nomination. They would need help from moderate Republicans, such as Susan Collins of Maine, who says it's still too early to know whether to support Kavanaugh.
I'm going to apply a very rigorous test. I do not apply an ideological litmus test on their personal views.
Democratic Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia, a state President Trump won in 2016, also says he hasn't made up his mind.
I want to look at all his findings and records and everything he's ruled on and all his writings and everything. So it's a deep dive we have to do. I think that's our responsibility.
Vice President Pence says the goal is to have Kavanaugh confirmed and sworn in by October.
All right, this is a fascinating conversation. It really is. And Michael Yolnosky and Jared Goldstein are both here from Roger Williams University. And before we start, President Farish's wake was today, correct?
Yes.
What a terrific man. I know he is so responsible for what is the modern Roger Williams University right now, and tremendous loss to the community, to obviously his family, his close friends, but that community is I'm sure, suffering right now with the loss. And so our condolences to you guys and the university. Care to have a thought on his leadership before we start?
He was just a great university president. He was a great friend to the law school, and he just did really good things for Rhode Island and for our students. And we're just going to miss him terribly.
Yeah, a really contemplative guy, I thought, in a lot of ways.
Very, very thoughtful, and a lawyer in addition to his PhD in biology. So he was
smart.
He was very smart.
As we say
wicked
here in
smart,
Rhode Island, wicked smart, as we say in Rhode Island. Quick thought on his legacy and what he's left the school?
I think engagement with the community. I mean, I do think, as you mentioned, that he has made a real. He is the face of the modern Roger Williams University, and that the profile of the university in Rhode Island, I think, has risen tremendously.
How's the campus been? Everybody okay? I mean, the kids are out right now, so it's a weird time, but.
Right.
I think he had a pretty good rap with the student body, too.
Oh, yeah. The students were, from a bunch of things that they wrote, were very upset, and they really bonded with him. They felt like, he had done, he was their president. He made a real difference in their lives.
Well, Godspeed to him, and again, my condolences to family, friends, and the Roger Williams community. This Supreme Court thing, your mutual expertise, I just want to soak it up. I always find, and I think we've talked about this before, I always find it fascinating that Senate, confirmees, if you will, are not going to focus at all on ideology. They're going to focus just on capability. And in fact, the president will offer no litmus tests at all, when all we will do is bang out what he thinks about stuff. How do we reconcile? Free for all. How do we reconcile this stuff?
I mean, let's remember, the president campaigned on a promise that he would only nominate justices who would overturn Roe versus Wade.
Oh.
And, so this was a campaign promise. So, we have then a nominee who then he says he didn't even ask him about Roe, which is probably true. He probably didn't directly say, how would you vote on abortion? Because he doesn't need to ask. We know where he stands. We have a track record with Kavanaugh, so we know where he's going to vote. He doesn't have to tell us. So of course it's all political. He nominates someone who's going to support his policies, and hopefully he thinks maybe protect his office. And everybody knows that that's the game. All the senators know what's at stake. But we'll have this charade of a hearing where they'll ask him a bunch of questions, and he won't give any honest answers, and then they'll vote.
Is there this wiggle room between what one's personal philosophy on abortion is and what Roe is really all about?
Sure, I think there is, but I think in his case, of course, what they really want to know is what is his position on Roe as a judge, and not so much personally. But
I don't think people really, I don't think my general audience, even though you're really smart out there, I don't know that people make the distinction between how someone spiritually, for instance, or on a humanitarian level feels about terminating a fetus versus the constitutional states' rights, separation, federal government issues that are mingling into Roe, right?
And I think the real wild card in Roe, and I don't know if Jared agrees with me on this, but the real wild card in Roe is whether he would vote to reverse it. I don't think there's any question that as a matter of first principle he would not have been in the majority in Roe, and that he probably thinks, or does think, that Roe was wrongly decided. Whether he will be the fifth vote to reverse Roe, that I think, I'm not so sure about that. I think death by 1,000 cuts is much more likely.
That's possible. It's hard, it's hard to know. But just on your point, yeah, the question of whether a woman should be able to choose abortion and whether the Constitution protects a right to abortion are two different questions. But as Michael said, it's the constitutional question that the president and his supporters are focused on. That is, does Kavanaugh believe that there's a constitutional right? And we have good reason to know just what he thinks. He is, in a speech a couple of years ago, he praised Chief Justice Rehnquist, who wrote a dissent in Roe, and he praised specifically Rehnquist's dissent, which said the Constitution doesn't protect any unenumerated rights unless there's a strong, specific tradition of protecting that right. And there was, according to Rehnquist and Kavanaugh, there's no long tradition of protecting a right to abortion.
But speed through the future, if Roe v. Wade was overturned, it would then turn back to the 50 states to make their own decisions.
That's right.
And so that's part of the interesting constitutional and statutory questions that exist from state to state, and I'm not even sure people really understand that either. Right?
Yeah, it would become an issue for every state to decide. That is, instead of it being a protected right, that the political is immune from the political process and that we don't get to vote on. Each state would get to decide whether to protect, as a matter of statute, a woman's ability to choose abortion. Rhode Island currently has on the books laws against abortion. We'd have to overturn that. We'd need, a majority in the legislature and a governor who would sign a bill overturning that law. And that would be the same in every state. It would become a political question instead of a question of rights. That is, instead of it being an individual choice for a person's privacy or deeply.
You're saying Rhode Island has laws protecting abortion?
No, they have a law prohibiting abortion. That's on the books.
It's just been sitting there, and of course it's a dead letter after Roe, and that's why there was this dust up at the end of the session as sort of a backup, just in
what
case.
What specifically does the statute say?
It says that the state constitution should not be interpreted to protect a right to abortion, and
written and passed when? Do we know? Decades.
Decades.
Yeah. So
decades.
before before Roe. So Roe says it doesn't matter what your state law says. There's a protected right. Same thing that happened with same-sex marriage.
Right.
Each state was deciding whether to accord the right of same-sex couples to get married, and the Supreme Court says no, that's a protected constitutional right.
So this is not a phony debate at the State House
Absolutely
right now.
not.
No, it's not. I mean, no, it's not.
Was it urgent? Well, I guess it was urgent. Do you find an urgency to cart before the horse to change that law, get it off the books?
Even worst case scenario, I assume, Roe will not be a dead letter by the time General Assembly is back in session and they have the ability to pass a law permitting women to get abortions in Rhode Island.
Right,
so
because Kavanaugh
we need a case. We need
is a fall appointee at best.
Right.
And how then would the case come up and be reviewed?
Well, there are any number of states that have passed restrictions on abortion. Some have pushed back the time when a woman can obtain an abortion. Currently under the constitutional standard is 24 weeks. Or viability, but some states have tried to push back to 19 or 18 or 16 weeks by statute, and then those laws get challenged, and then what would happen is the court would then accept the case. It's called granting cert. They would agree to decide whether these state laws that restrict abortion beyond what they've currently said is acceptable are constitutional, and then the court could at that time decide the statute is valid or not. In one way, they could decide that the statutes that impose greater restrictions on abortions are valid is by saying, well, Roe is overturned, period. They might not need to go that far, as Michael points out. They could say additional restrictions are acceptable, notwithstanding Roe.
Right. I love this conversation. It's fascinating. I told you this was going to be a great show. When we come back, we'll talk about the nominee himself, okay? Stay with us.
He will be stepping onto a Supreme Court, if he is confirmed, that has a pattern of very troubling, partisan 5-4 decisions that look terribly predictable in favor of big Republican corporate donors and Republican efforts in politics. And predictability is not a thing that the Supreme Court should be known for. It should be independent, and every litigant should believe they have a fair shot.
Yeah, unless the biases are in Senator Whitehouse's, wheelhouse, and then right. I mean, what he said is true, but nobody acts in the nominating process. That I don't know. So, who do I give the benefit of the doubt to that they're actually process-driven and not results-driven or predictive ideology-driven?
Well, I think it's. To be honest, I think it's much harder to give anybody the benefit of the doubt on that now. I think there are studies that have been done that show that it is much more likely now that a Supreme Court justice votes with his or her party, as was the case 20 years ago.
Right.
There's no question it's a more partisan body, I think, and there are individual exceptions we can talk about.
So tell me about this nominee. Let's roll a picture on him to make sure we understand. This Brett Kavanaugh, anybody that gets to circuit court level is obviously an accomplished professional, right? Period.
Oh, yeah.
Jared, you've run into him.
Sure. Yeah, when I was at the Justice Department, he was working for the Office of the Independent Counsel, Ken Starr, during the Whitewater investigation. There was some litigation about whether they were entitled to subpoena Hillary Clinton's notes, and that was a case he was working on and I was working on.
Do we properly judge, because it's going to come up a lot, for any nominee, do we properly judge, do we properly debate and predict what a nominee will do as a judge from their legal work as lawyers? I mean, projects come up, clients come up. It doesn't matter. I don't think that the legal work is philosophical in nature. It's functional, right?
That's right. When you're representing a client, you take positions on behalf of the client. You shouldn't be held to those views. I mean, that is, the views of your client are not your own views.
It will happen in this process, though. You represented da-da-da-da-da. In fact, there's a terrorism issue that, 2002 advice that he was giving George W. on torture. Talk to me about that.
Well, I think the question about that, though, is whether or not he told the truth when he was nominated
in 2005 for the circuit court.
Because he said he had not participated in any conversations about the torture policy. And there's some question about whether he was telling the truth, because apparently he got called in to a White House counsel debate about how Justice Kennedy, who he had clerked for, would accept a particular argument that had something to do with torture. There's some debate.
Do you think if it bears out that he has to do a mea culpa on that it'll disqualify him?
I don't. I mean, I think because he's, I'm not saying these won't be issues at the hearing, but I think because he's been on the bench since 2006 and he's written lots of opinions, there's going to be much less speculation, I think, about what kind of judge he might be. I'm not saying the Democrats wouldn't want to dig some of this up, but I think the eye is going to be on that body of work, his body of work as a judge.
Yeah, I think this little kerfuffle about what he said in his prior nomination will turn out to be not very much. But the Democrats are looking for dirt on him, and it's easier to be able to point to the allegation that he lied when he was testifying before, because that would be disqualifying, than to talk about his judicial ideology, which he's going to be unlikely to want to discuss in any depth. They will try to, the main focus, as Dean Yolnosky points out, will be about his almost 300 opinions that he's written since he's become a circuit judge, and many of them do give very strong indication about what kind of justice he would be.
So tell me, what's the flavor? What do you think?
He will be a very reliable conservative. This is I would say, a very conventional choice by an unconventional president. This is today's Republican justice. He will be Justice Roberts, I think, will become the new median justice. He will become the new Anthony Kennedy, and Brett Kavanaugh is likely to be voting with Alito and with Thomas and with Gorsuch. That's my sense.
Oh yeah, I think that that I think is a very good prediction, and we have every reason to think so, because in a wide range of cases he's expressed strongly conservative and predictably conservative views. That is, he's against, in general, is against government regulation. So he's, in a series of cases, ruled against EPA and their construction of their statutes. Whenever under the Obama administration, they read their statutes fairly broadly to give them power to regulate power plants and greenhouse gases, and he, in almost every case, said that they had gone too far. So it's fairly predictable that he'll say he'll be hostile to administrative agencies, and will be supportive of executive power and protective of the president's ability to make decisions in a vast range of cases.
When we come back, we'll talk about the public's acumen for these things. It seems that it's rising a little. Stay with us. The Supreme Court, it's how many times on the phone lines in the 2016 election did people explain to me that they didn't buy Donald Trump's act, but it was this body that they were most concerned about when they voted in 2016. I did hear a lot of Supreme Court, organic commentary from my listeners and people that I know, and so I think we have a higher acumen right now, or interest at least, about the Supreme Court amongst the electorate. That'll probably bleed into the midterms as well, because right behind this particular nomination, this nomination may get wrapped up in this midterm election, right? It may.
Will it be decided before the election, you mean? Or
will
the election be an issue?
This is why they're trying to make this thing happen in October, because they want the midterm elections not to impact this Kavanaugh nomination. But Ginsburg is right behind. Hopefully she lives until she's 120, but right? We're not, talk to me.
Well, I do think that I said when Gorsuch replaced Scalia that Merrick Garland aside, that we weren't going to notice a big difference. That the next pick was the legacy pick.
This one.
Yeah. I'm now back, and this isn't really the legacy pick. The next pick is the legacy pick.
Yeah,
because
this is a 5-4-ish, 4.5, 4.5.
Kennedy is much more conservative than people realize. I think when push comes to shove, he had some high-profile 5-4s where he voted with the liberal wing of the court, but he was a very reliable conservative vote, almost as reliable as Justice Roberts, Chief Justice Roberts.
Yeah, I mean, there were a few issues where Kennedy joined the liberals, and I think those issues are going to be the ones that could easily get reversed now, with Justice Kavanaugh. So, it can make a difference, on that set of issues. LGBT rights was a big issue for Justice Kennedy that Justice Kavanaugh is unlikely to agree with him. Roe versus Wade is an issue where Kennedy joined the liberals, where Kavanaugh is unlikely to agree with him. But on a range of other issues, Kennedy was consistently with the conservatives. So it may not change things much. But I do agree with you that this will be an issue in the midterms. The question is, which way does it cut? Who's more excited? I tend to think Republicans tend to be more excited about
more motivated.
The Supreme Court. That's right.
Yes, and it seems to me that the Republican leadership has just suffered Donald Trump's behavior because they are one-minded about this. Yes?
Because there's almost nothing that their base cares about more than taking back the court, because they see the court as being the source of a lot of things that have gone wrong in America, starting with abortion rights, affirmative action,
same-sex
marriage. On issue after issue, they think the court is to blame for issues that they really care about, and the only way that they can win on those issues is by taking back the court. And so their base is very fired up, on this set of issues. Now, the Democrats are, care about it too, especially after what happened.
But they have the issues now, and the dynamic of human behavior in elections. The group that thinks they've been wronged. Is more active.
That's right.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and they've really they've held a grudge. Roe just never went away, and the court has become much more conservative since the days of the Warren Court. But these hot button issues, the Republicans just will not forget.
Oh my God! I mean, I could talk to you guys all night. Thank you so much for being here.
Our pleasure.
Does he survive? Kavanaugh, he survives?
Oh, I think so.
Yeah.
I mean, unless there's some skeleton in the closet, unless there's some scandal that we don't know about, unless some member of the Senate dies, I just don't see him getting
because the numbers just kind of speak for themselves.
Yeah.
Is there early action in his tenure on Roe v. Wade?
Action, not to overturn Roe, but I think they will look at a statute that poses the question of the breadth of the protection provided by Roe in if not his first term, then in his second term, I think.
It's going to be really fascinating.
Will be.
What a time to be teaching, huh? Right?
Yeah, my students are always very excited about this stuff. When we have confirmation hearings, I think classes will be in session. We'll play some in class. Students will be very excited.
We'll be asking for your advice and consent on these issues as we go along. Thank you guys. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Roger Williams University, by the way. When we come back, final word. Some really good academic firepower there. I can promise you this program, it's original. Friday night airing as you're watching it will be repeated because we've got some time before the whole Supreme Court thing develops even further, but some wise analysis. We'll try to give you more on Monday. Have yourself a great weekend. Don't forget to tune in weekdays 3 to 6 on WPRL. Thanks. Good night.